Welcome to the Programming Alliance podcast, where we are on a mission to build productive minds and young patriots. Today, we're going to talk about your genetic propensity for disease, allergy, absorption of minerals, factors that determine your health. Wouldn't that be interesting? Elwin Robinson is here. He's going to break it down for us. So let's get into it. Elwin, thank you for joining the Programming Alliance podcast. We're pumped to have you on. You have a unique background, set of experience in genetics and health. And so we want to unpack all that with you today. But before we get into some of those questions that we have, could you give us a quick background on yourself and your experience?
Yeah, the quickest version, I guess, is I got into health in my late 20s because I was very unhealthy. And I thought I was living a very healthy lifestyle for over 10 years. No drinking, no smoking, no fast food, no all the things that you're not supposed to do. And I was feeling better for a while. And then when I was about to turn 40, I got really sick again. And it was something that no one could help with. Medical doctors, all kinds of alternative people of all flavor. No one could work out what was going on. And it was only doing a genetic test that helped me work out what the issue was. And this particular issue was a thing where I experienced constant stabbing pain. And it was one of those rare, unusual kinds of pains where painkillers didn't work. Things like paracetamol, I don't know what you guys call it, Tylenol, that kind of stuff, often isn't effective enough. But then when pain's really bad, they usually give you an opioid. This type of pain, actually, opioids made it worse. And then the other type didn't work. So it sucked. I had several years of being in very bad pain most of the time. As I said, no one able to help me. And it was only genetics that helped me to work out what was going on with me. And I tried it on my wife and then my friends and my business partners, some employees, some family members. And I was like, oh my God, this is so helpful and so accurate. Thinking about young people being here, I was like, if I'd have known this information when I was young, I could have prevented being in this agonizing pain for several years. So I wish I'd have known this information. And because it made such a huge difference to me and such a huge difference to many other people in my life, I decided to make it my mission to get out there to as many people as possible. So that's the short version.
Okay, awesome. Cool. Looking forward to digging into that.
So today we are talking about jeans. What do you prefer? Wrangler or Levi's?
I have not worn jeans for over 20 years, so honestly, neither.
Okay. Yeah, Max,
Wow.
It's a different kind of jeans, Max.
Oh,
Yeah,
I thought
yeah.
it was just like jeans. That's strange. Someone that really is good with jeans.
Well, now we know.
Like jeans.
We might have to figure out new questions, boys.
Yeah. How? Okay, let's rewrite them.
Okay. Well, could you tell us more? You've embarked on a business and a journey to help people feel better and be healthier through understanding their genetics. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that works and how this is revolutionizing the way people think about health?
Yeah, it should be revolutionizing the way people think about health. And I think it's just starting to, but we're in the very early stages. As I said, it could have prevented a massive amount of pain and turmoil for me. And I see clients over and over and over again who that's the case for. That they're like, oh my God, if I'd have known this decades ago, it could have saved me so much hassle. Now, to be fair, decades ago, this technology didn't exist. So, as much as we wish we had a time machine, this is all very recent. So what do we do it? How do we do it? First of all, we have to sequence your genome. So what that usually involves is you just spit into a tube. Sometimes you just swab, sometimes you spit. You send it off to a lab. The lab will do its lab magic, and it will come up with this massive list of code. And it's just like strings of numbers and letters together. And if I were to show it to you, you'd be like, this is gibberish. But that's actually the genetic code that makes up you, or a portion of it. Most labs won't sequence the whole thing, but they'll do the relevant bits, the bits that most of the research has been done on. And so companies you might have heard of, like 23andMe and Ancestry.com, they're reasonably well known, especially 23andMe, not always for good reasons. They did a big marketing push, 10-ish years ago, something like that, to make everyone aware of it. And what they let people know is, look, if you send off your spit to us, then we can tell you what your ancestry is, right? We can say, did you have ancestors in Northern Europe or in Sub-Saharan Africa or whatever? And a lot of people found that interesting. A lot of people did that. It turns out that while that is very interesting and potentially, transformative for some people, that's kind of the least you can do with that information, that big block of data that those companies will extract. And one of the far more useful things you can do is give it to a company like ours, who can tell you, based on that information, you have high risk or a low risk for hundreds of different health conditions. We can also tell you if you need more of any kind of nutrients, which you're only as strong as your weakest link, and we're all made out of these building blocks. And if you're lacking any building block that you are made out of, sooner or later you're going to have problems. And some people need more than others. In the same way, it's kind of crazy that if a 100-pound woman or a 300-pound guy goes to a doctor and has a problem, 9 times out of 10 they'll give them the same dosage. That's kind of crazy, right? Given how different their bodies are. Well, it's kind of the same with the nutritional tables, the recommended daily amount being the same for people irrespective of their genetics. Like, some people need way more of some nutrients than others and have real problems if they don't get it. Same with toxins. Some people's body really struggles to deal with certain toxins. They have a genetic tendency towards allergies. We can even tell you things like personality traits. We can say if you're more likely to be outgoing, if you're more likely to be disagreeable, like competitive and argumentative, if you're more likely to be aggressive, if you have good leadership skills, if you have high levels of creativity, all of that kind of stuff. Now, we can't guarantee that what we say is exactly right, but we give you the genetic part of the story. So, meaning, what happens to you from birth onwards also affects things like your personality and your risk of getting certain diseases. And that's usually what's focused on. There's a certain kind of political push for that, like the blank slate theory, right? We're all born the same and it's all about how we're raised. But that's only partially true, right? Some of us are taller, some of us are smarter, some of us have better digestive systems, some of us have better immune systems, whatever, all this stuff. And it's very helpful to know that. Because again, you're only as strong as your weakest links. And knowing what your weakest links are, you can ideally prevent, or in my case, because I was already pretty messed up, try and resolve those. And that's extremely valuable information.
Really interesting. And I do think it's going to be the upcoming trend of how people get their health protocols. And so I'm pumped about that. We'll drop this in the description, but what is the name of your business and site so that people can check it out?
Yeah, thank you. Geneticinsights.co. Genetic Insights, plural.co, if you go there. And then also have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Elwin Robinson, which is my name. Lots of free education about all this stuff there.
Okay, awesome. And so when somebody puts their results through your program, then what's the process? What does that look like?
What we do is quite different from a lot of companies. There's kind of, if you've never heard of this stuff, what a lot of companies do seems pretty impressive. So what they do is there's like very famous companies you may have heard of with like celebrities behind them. And what they're doing is almost like Stone Age technology. This is what we're doing. So let me explain the difference. So what a lot of companies do, they will look for this, again, huge list of data, and they'll pick one point and they'll say, oh, because you've got this, that means this. So as you said, because you got this, you should take this supplement. Because you don't have this, you should take this supplement or whatever. That is fine as far as it goes, but it's extremely primitive. What we do, we have an extremely advanced AI program that will calculate millions of variables in some cases. So, for instance, a lot of places are like, oh, you have the MTHFR SNP. We can get to those terms if you want in a minute. So therefore, you're more of a risk of heart disease and you should be taking these supplements. Okay. Well, when we're evaluating your risk of heart disease, we'll evaluate often over 1 million different SNPs. And then we'll come to a conclusion based on everything put together. This is your risk of this particular issue. So it's way more sophisticated than, ironically, most of the popular systems out there. I'm not claiming we're the only ones who do what we do. There are other companies that do something similar. Our guarantee is that we are the most affordable and simplest of all the ones who do it properly, like we do.
You and I spoke a little bit before this, and I had actually opted into one of these programs, as you know. I sent you some of those results, and it was a very small sliver of genetic information, MTHFR, etc. And their practice is generally to take that information and then convert that into a curated supplement program that then they send out, and you're on a subscription for this supplement. So that's kind of their business model.
Yeah.
And for me personally, it didn't work. It didn't. In fact, I didn't have any genetic anomalies, so they didn't have any.
Well, because they were only looking
this,
at 6. There's
Yes,
millions, and they only check 6. So,
Exactly. So based on those 6, they said, here's a multivitamin. They didn't really have much for me. And I had a couple of things, and I also shared with you my blood tests. So for the audience's sake, what you and I discussed doing is I am going to get my stuff into your program, and we'll do a follow-up on it, but we'll share like what we find. And I think that could be interesting. And so people can follow along in that process. If you want to get on it sooner, they can check out your link and get on board. But I was sold as we talked further about it, getting a lot more depth, and you're not just trying to sell supplements.
Sorry, just to answer that question, we have over 500 reports. Some reports are less than 20 pages long, but some reports are over 100 pages. Most of the report is recommendations. We organize things based on 3 factors: the amount of impact it's likely to have based on actual research, the amount of evidence that it's actually going to do anything based on research, and then the validity that it has for your specific genetic variants. We look at all 3 of those factors. And when you are honestly identifying those, you're never going to have a supplement on top. It's usually lifestyle stuff. Sometimes it's dietary stuff. If it's heart health, it's probably going to be exercise or maybe a certain diet, something like that. It's not going to be a supplement right at the top. Again, not against supplements. It's just the reality is lifestyle things normally do have the biggest impact. When it comes to recommendations, yes, sometimes we do give loads, but if you just do the top 3, that's often more impactful than doing like the bottom 50 anyway.
That makes sense. It's kind of like the old 80-20 rule, perhaps.
Yes.
And you had showed me a couple of sample reports, and yes, you rank them in terms of what's going to have the most impact. So that's a really helpful way to look at it. So I'm very excited. I got my process started, but I'm excited to get the results, check it out. And for those that want to see that, we'll have a follow-up to this, and yeah, should be interesting.
Yeah, it should be fascinating. I've done it a few times with people where they're willing to share their stuff, and it requires a lot of courage because it really is like, I don't know, doing a reading with a psychic in front of an audience, because it will know a lot about you, including some things that some people are uncomfortable about sharing publicly.
This question I have for you is a little bit more fun.
Okay.
And less serious, because that was deep. You've probably seen things like X-Men, Spider-Man, Jurassic Park.
Mm-hmm.
Are any of those things possible to happen in real life? Reality?
Yeah, well, let's do them one at a time. So X-Men, like, what about Wolverine? He has that ability to regenerate and regrow, right? Tissue, like super, super fast. Is that possible? Yeah, I would say absolutely. Now, is that possible today? Can you go and do that? No. But if you're asking, is it possible ever? Yes. Like having Superman type powers, that might be a stretch. Having Wolverine type powers, that's definitely possible. So we'd have to take it again on a case by case basis when it comes to superheroes. But
so claws coming out of your hands?
Well, that's a mechanical thing, right? The key thing is that his tissue can regrow afterwards, right? That's the key thing. You could put claws in your hands right now. The problem is that you'd bleed out and die. The thing we have to do is stop that happening. Jurassic Park, yes, again, potentially. We definitely don't have the technology yet, but that one might actually potentially be closer. I don't know what will happen in your lifetime or my lifetime, but if they carry on pursuing it, I don't see any reason why not.
There's the Spider-Man also.
Spider-Man. Being bitten by a radioactive spider will not give you powers, no.
Dang it.
Dang.
What if you inject the blood of the radioactive spider?
You would probably die.
In reality, radioactivity, I don't think has ever shown a positive mutation. Like it always just degrades and break things down. So could clever scientists in a lab give you Spider-Man's powers? Maybe, but is being bitten by a radioactive spider going to do it? No, almost certainly not.
Life's great mysteries solved right here on this podcast, boys. Huh?
Wow.
Yeah.
There's a treatment right now that is available in the Middle East. I think it's Dubai, where you can go and you can be injected with this gene therapy that will make you significantly more muscular. It's called follistatin. Basically, your muscles are broken down by something called myostatin, and then follistatin breaks down myostatin. That's the simple way of putting it. It stops the thing that makes your muscles break down. So it's a different mechanism from steroids. The difference is steroids are dangerous and unhealthy and reduce your lifespan. Follistatin has been shown, at least in animal models, that it can extend your lifespan by maybe 30%, something like that. So there are some people on the cutting edge of longevity, I'm not one of them, but who are happy to take risks of those things, and they look like they have a ripped, shredded physique. They don't have to do any weight training to get it, and they can actually live longer potentially with that. So that's already available to the public. If you have the money, you can slide it down on the counter and get that done. So who knows what's going on right now that they're not telling us about yet? Stuff like that makes me think, yeah, that will be possible sooner or later. Like your Wolverine powers.
Kind of like, yeah, making superheroes. Wow.
Oh,
okay. Very interesting.
How do you determine ancestry from someone's genes? Like where they're from?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm going to give you a deep answer again. I'll try my best to make it be simple. Because the answer to that is actually the same answer to how do we do what we do. So your genetic code, as I said, is like lines of code. Just like, I don't know if you've ever seen The Matrix, or maybe you're too young for that, but you know, just lines and lines of code.
We've seen all of them.
Awesome. So we're made out of this code, right? Now, we can tell you if you have an increased genetic risk of a syndrome like irritable bowel syndrome, even though doctors and medical scientists don't understand it. So how can we do that? If we don't even understand what causes it, how can we tell you if you're more likely to have it? Correlation and causation. So what that means is we don't know what causes this syndrome, but we can just say people with this SNP, so you got the T, I got the C, the ones with the C are more likely to have this syndrome than the ones with the T. That's really all it's based on. So that's called correlation. Not that we know what causes it, but just that people with this SNP are more likely to have it. Now, I just gave a syndrome as an example. That's the same for blue eyes, blonde hair. So all of it is just based out of that. It basically, the bottom line is they look at these SNPs, which is this variance in the genetic code, and go, all right, we see that in people with this ancestry. That's really what they're doing ultimately.
That was the simple version?
I'm sorry. Yes.
It's complex stuff, boys.
Holy smokes.
I suppose as time goes on, the more accurate DNA feedback will be, and the more predictable it will be for a variety of things that maybe we didn't even track previously, but now we do. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, exactly. The more people who test and we know their medical history and all the rest of it, the more data that we have that we can make it more and more accurate. Yeah. All we can give you is risk score. And all we're allowed to say we do is we can mitigate risk or reduce risk. What we can't do is diagnose anything. And what we can't do is definitely prevent anything. And I say that not just to legally cover ourselves, but also because it's true. Like we can say you have an increased risk of something, and if you do these things, you can reduce your risk of it. So there's another field of genetics, let me put it this way, called epigenetics. I'm the kind of person who really believes in personal responsibility. I really believe that you can create your own destiny. As someone who's held those beliefs very firmly for a fairly long time, genetics was quite a bitter pill to swallow because it ruins that a little bit. Like that, this is like an argument in the political sphere. Again, one side says, oh, everyone can just pull themselves up by their own bootstraps and do their best. And the other one says, no, it's not that simple. Some people have privilege and it's easier for some people than others. And they're both right to some degree. And the thing that really proves the second point right is genetics, even though often that second group doesn't want to use that. But some people just are born, like, for instance, more intelligent. And intelligence or IQ is the number one predictor of success in life. And it's true, if you were born with low IQ, you will struggle to be successful in life. It's not only to do with money, but it's to do with career success. It's to do with social relationships. It's even to do with health and longevity. Smarter people overall live longer. So that's something that you're born with that really doesn't change much. That's pretty significant. And so that kind of shakes the whole foundation of anyone can be successful if they just work hard enough. It's actually a lot harder for some people than other people.
Yeah.
And it's the same with health. Anyone can be healthy if they just eat right and exercise. You hear that a lot. Or everyone can be a good weight. You know, no one needs to be overweight. The only reason people are overweight is because they're lazy and they eat too much and they don't exercise enough. It's true that anyone can get to an optimal weight if they work really, really hard at it in many cases, most cases. But it's also true it's way harder for some people than others. And it's good to like realize that and acknowledge that. It was quite philosophically jarring for me, first of all, to get into all this, to realize that a big part of your success or lack of success in something is down to health.
That's really interesting. It goes into one of our upcoming questions, obesity, right? There's a number of things that might be genetically related to that, but then there's also behaviors and habits, right? There's like an interesting dialogue happening out there in terms of, well, is it something that they just can't deal with because genetically or their metabolism, or is it habits, or is it a combination of both? And is that combination like 50-50 or 10-90? But at any rate, how do you describe the situation with obesity?
That's a great question. I think a lot of people are very skeptical when genes are blamed for obesity, and rightly so, because it's basically a way of blaming it and saying it's no one's fault. And of course, if that were true, then we'd have roughly the same rate of obesity now as we did 100 years ago. Let's just use your country as an example. Now, that's obviously not true, right? The obesity rate is way higher now in your country and in mine and almost every country than it was 100 years ago. Or even, let's say, 50 years ago. And let's say 50 years ago, because 50 years ago, there was just as much food around. And in fact, I've seen studies that show that people 50 to 100 years ago ate more calories than they do these days. It definitely is not only genetics, but it is partly genetics. So your upbringing, your environment, and what you do now is still very significant in most cases. As I said, with some things like IQ and intelligence, it's not, but with most things, you can still make a significant difference. And so let's say that we are living in an environment currently where we are being flooded with poisons. I think is becoming more mainstream that more of us are realizing that's the case, both that we're taking involuntarily with fast food and smoking and stuff, but also even if we're trying our best, it's in the drinking water, it's in the air we breathe, it's everywhere. Exactly. So if we're being flooded with poisons, it's very hard to be in that top 100%. I know for people like us, it can be tempting to, we want to tell people if they just sort themselves out and they just start exercising and eating right, like we want to blame it on their laziness or whatever. But the reality is, no, there are real medical, glandular in this case, issues that will make a difference. And the pancreas is another gland, and that creates insulin. And when people have insulin resistance, it's very hard for them to lose the weight around their belly. You know, the kind of person who looks like fairly not that fat, but they have a really big fat belly. That's usually insulin resistance. That's another thing. Some people, this is more common in women, like they have a lot of fat, especially around the upper legs and their thighs. That's estrogen, often estrogen dominance. And again, so long as these hormones are out of balance, and there is often a genetic factor for that, then it doesn't matter how much they diet and exercise. So as I said, it's certainly not all genes, to go back to my original answer, because 100 years ago it was way less common. But if you have issues with the genes, plus your environment is toxic, plus you have unhealthy habits, it can be true. Maybe you have dieted loads and exercised loads and you can't lose any weight. That's also possible.
I'm learning a lot. That is interesting, because all of these scenarios you pointed out where there's, let's say, a guy that doesn't look overweight, but then he's got a big stomach, or a female who's like super in shape, but then they're carrying weight in a specific part of their body. I do wonder to myself, there must be something unique happening there. I suspect it's like a lot of things in life, whether it's how we manage our weight, or our mental capacity, or our energy level, or our ability to problem solve. I suspect some of us have advantages, some of us have disadvantages. What does G.I. Joe say? Knowing is half the battle, guys.
Who's
so
that?
Knowing, then you can sort of build your own habits and protocols.
Honestly, evaluating your strengths for weaknesses. I don't know, guys, do trading cards exist anymore where you have like different characters and they have like maybe they have high magic ability and low warrior ability or whatever, that kind of stuff? Does that still exist?
Dungeons and Dragons, right, Will?
But they don't necessarily have playing cards.
No, but they have different skill levels, right, for different things.
Like
Strength,
spells,
strength, intelligence.
Yeah, so they can't be
stuff
high
like
in
that.
all of them, right? And they can't be low in all of them. It's like some are good at some things, some are good at others. And so, knowing that about yourself, it can be humbling. Sometimes, like, you wish you were really smart and you're not, or you wish you're really strong and you're not, or whatever. But it's useful to know that information.
I'm getting nervous about my results, boys.
Uh-oh, Dad.
Medical and pharma industries, I think people are waking up to this, but ultimately the medical or big pharma industries seem to be losing some credibility out in the marketplace in terms of just wanting to get people, perpetually medicated, because then they become long-term patients and they have a higher ROI, or return on investment, boys. So the sicker that people are, as long as they don't die, the sicker people are over their lifetime, the more money that the medical industry and pharma will make on people. And so if I had my tinfoil hat on, I would say they're actually on a mission to keep people perpetually sick, but not too sick, just sick enough. And what you're doing, I love it, because we're actually breaking down genetics into a way that people can understand and assess their risk factors and work around this. Am I crazy? What do you think?
Yep.
Yeah.
You're crazy.
I definitely agree, but I also slightly disagree. I'll give my own controversial take on this. I do think the profit motive has hurt our health, but I don't think it's in the way that most people think. I think the profit motive has hurt our health more in like the cronyism, where basically big industry of various types, agricultural, has managed to bribe, cajole, whatever politicians for a long time to get away with poisoning us. So there's definitely that, right? The mercury in our water, that means that all the fish are unsafe to eat, and all the toxins in our air and all the rest of it. They should never have got away with that. And they did, because they did a lot of bribery. The medical system is a little bit more complicated than that, I think. I actually don't think the profit motive is the main problem. A lot of people feel like the problem with government is that big business has corrupted them. I actually think it's the opposite. I actually think the problem is that business has been corrupted by government. Because if you think about it, what business does is it voluntarily offers something, and if you want, you can participate. So with a business, if you don't like a business, you can just stop buying stuff from them and they will go out of business.
Right.
So the way that a business gets power is by offering perceived value. Now, admittedly, sometimes perceived value is not actual value, right? So, Fruit Loops maybe are not actual value, but people think they are, so they still choose to buy.
Yep.
But at least
Right.
it's a voluntary situation. The way that government gets power is through force and threats of violence, right? They get your money is because if you don't give it to them, they will take your stuff. And if you resist that, they will throw you in jail, where someone will probably do violence to you. So there's a threat of violence always behind everything the government does. The problem is the connection between business and government, which actually was originally what the definition of real fascism is about. If you heard of fascism, it comes from the Italian fascis, which is this binding together of government and business. That's what it actually is. And that is what we're actually living under. So the problem is the big business pays government to maintain a monopoly. Meaning they will, for instance, whenever there's a cry for more regulations, the simple person thinks, oh, well, that's great. Those regulations will protect us. They will stop big business from hurting us. But then, funnily enough, big business is usually actually the ones lobbying and encouraging the politicians to push the regulations. So why are they doing that? Because the more regulations they are, the only people who can keep up with it is big business. Everyone else, small companies like mine, we can't afford to keep up with the regulations. And so everyone goes out of business except for the one business. Only Google survives, only Amazon survives, or whatever. Like there's only one left. And then, of course, once you have a monopoly, once you don't have any competition, then you can start getting away with almost anything, because where else are your customers going to go? So the real problem is that government has this unfettered power over us. So to go back to the health issue, it is a problem that the head of Pfizer then becomes the head of the FDA, then goes back to being the head of Pfizer. But the issue is more that these pharmaceutical companies can instruct the government, which has the threat of violence behind it, to force people to use their products, which is what happened recently, the mandates, which is what everyone rightly freaked out about. But also, and this has been going on since its inception, they can use force to suppress all the competition. So in a genuinely free, fair market, people offering what we would have the level of our credibility versus a medical doctor pushing only pharmaceuticals, not that they're all like that, but for instance, would be determined entirely based on the amount of reviews, right? So the medical doctor, they had a 3.5. I've got a 4.7. Well, he's more trustworthy. But of course, that's not the way it works, because the regulations are like, well, doctor, because the government backs that, and government doesn't back anything else. Now, in terms of the medical system itself, I don't think it's the profits most. I actually think it's socialism that's the problem. And let me explain what I mean. I've debated this. I have a person in the health care system who's very close to me, who I've debated this with a few times. And I say to them, look, emergency room, right? If you get two people arrive, one of them's a wonderful person. They have given to their community their whole life. They've really looked after their health. They've got a great reputation. Everyone likes them. And then you have another person, they're a criminal. They've just finished murdering and robbing someone. And the great person is ever so slightly less sick than the criminal. Who do you see first? And they'll say, absolutely, it will be the criminal. Why?
Yeah.
Because they have a greater need.
Yes.
So this is a system that is purely based on need. Deserve has zero impact on the prioritization of the medical system. So one problem with that is what I just said. Here's another bigger problem. I think it's 25% of the total healthcare budget in the United States, and it's very similar here, is spent on keeping people alive during the last 2 weeks or so of life. So when most people are suffering, they're half dead, they may be half conscious, probably most of them don't even want to be alive. That's what most of the money is spent on. But this makes sense within a socialist system, because the foundation bedrock of socialism is from each according to their ability, but most importantly, to each according to their need. So obviously, who needs medical care the most? The person who's almost dead. Who needs it the least? The young person who's doing fine. However, could we prevent a lot of problems by putting a bit more allocation in the younger people who are not almost dead yet, and putting a little bit less in the people who are almost dead yet? Could we save a vast amount of money? Could we stop the healthcare system probably, going broke or bankrupting your company, your whole country, as some people are talking about stuff like that? Yeah. Could a service like ours or any other equivalent, save a vast amount of money, a vast amount of suffering? Of course, but they don't do it because the system is fundamentally socialist. Even though I know you guys have insurance, so there is that extra layer of, do we treat them? Do we give them good treatment or bad treatment? Then there's the will their insurance cover it element. But that's the only layer of capitalism on top of it. It's really socialism still, with one capitalist layer of what insurance level do you have. But it's still fundamentally the same thing. They're going to give it to you not based on whether you deserve it, not based on what's the best investment in most cases. There's very few examples of that, like transplants. Like, they may not give you a liver transplant if you haven't quit drinking or taking drugs for a while, stuff like that. So there's like a tiny bit of deserve in it, but it's 99% socialist.
Yeah.
Okay.
I love that explanation. In fact, that resonates a lot in terms of some of the challenges we see here. In fact, I posted something recently about the fact that people can get on Ozempic indefinitely, and insurance will cover it, but insurance won't cover a person's gym membership.
Yeah,
so it's
absolutely.
Yeah.
So which one is
weird.
actually the better investment to build habits, or maybe it's a pre-made healthy meal system, whatever. What is actually creating better habits and results? I don't think there's any argument. And then there's a medication which has a number of side effects.
Just to touch on Ozempic for 30 seconds. I said earlier, if someone's metabolism is fast enough, if their thyroid is at the high end, they can't put on weight. So Ozempic does the exact opposite. Ozempic slows down your digestive system so that you're not hungry, but that slows down your metabolism even more. So that means you have to stay on it for the rest of your life, because if you stop and you eat the same amount as you did before, your metabolism is now even slower. So you're going to gain weight even more quickly. So first of all, there's a lifelong dependency. Second of all, the slower your digestive system works, the more likely you are to have SIBO, which is like a pathogenic, a bad bacteria overgrowth of your intestine, or a bad fungus overgrowth of your intestine. Third of all, and this is the most important thing, when you slow down your metabolism, which you do when you eat less, that's one of the problems, not just of Ozempic, but dieting in general. When you slow down your metabolism, that means there's less energy for every system of your body. It means your
Right.
immune system doesn't have enough energy. It means your digestive system doesn't have enough energy. It means your skin doesn't have enough energy, like et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So my prediction is you'll get a lot of people in 10 to 20 years who stayed on Ozempic long term who look thin, but really, really accelerated aging. That's what I would expect to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's deep, but
Okay.
really interesting. Okay, nice. What are your final words for the GSD Nation?
You are the master of your own destiny, but it's still helpful to know the cards you've been dealt by nature or God, whatever you believe in. So if you're interested in finding out about that, you can go to geneticinsights.co.
Well, that wraps up our podcast today. This was super interesting. We're going to have a lot of good information that people are going to appreciate coming out of this. We're going to drop your information, links in the description. That way, anybody can go and get this checked out. Understand the cards that you have been dealt as an individual. And then I'm going to do it myself, and we're going to do a follow-up. So that could be awesome, embarrassing, a little bit of both. I'm looking forward to it. So thanks again for coming on, and that's a wrap.
Thank you. Bye.
If you enjoyed the show, help us out. Like, subscribe, share, leave us a review. Until next time.